Hello everyone, this is General Hand Grenade. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. In this video we will be continuing in our recreation of World War I in the game Global War 1914. We are in the summer of 1914, which is where the war begins, and that's where the core game begins for Global War 1914. There's a prequel as well where everyone starts at peace, but in the core game there's a couple of nations that start at peace in this, and one of them is the Ottoman Empire, and that's who we're going to be talking about today, is the Ottoman Empire. And you can see them here in this turquoise color, and this is their capital here, Constantinople. So let's just talk about that for a second, the Ottomans. So they were established a long time ago. It began in the 14th century in the empire, and it ended in the early 20th century at the end of the First World War. So it did start in 1354 when they first started expanding and became a transcontinental empire by entering Europe. And that's the thing about and what makes Constantinople and what makes this region of the world extremely interesting and important was that it was the crossroads for the East and the West. The West being Europe, and the East, what they described back then as being the Orient. That's where the name of the train, the Orient Express, came from. It went from Paris to Constantinople, and this was the beginning of the Orient in Constantinople. And nowadays we call it the Middle East, of course, but back then it was called the Orient. Anyway, so in 1453 the Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople. So they didn't have Constantinople to begin with. That was the home of the Byzantine Empire. And so when they captured it in 1453, they ended the Byzantine Empire. And that was just 3 years before the printing press was invented in Germany. And that was the beginning, of course, of the Renaissance. So very important time in history. And that was one of the things that created the Renaissance. It wasn't just the printing press. It was the Muslims capturing Constantinople and infusing their culture with the Western culture, because all that was separated them was the Dardanelles Straits, right? And it's basically just a river, like it's no bigger than that. So lots of Eastern ideas moving into the West and Western ideas moving into the East, and the world was getting smarter. The printing press. Anyway, moving on though, in 1908 the Ottoman Empire was getting pretty old by then, and it was still kind of old world, and there was a revolution of sorts in the Ottoman Empire. It was called the Young Turk Revolution, and it started in 1908, and it went on to basically the end of the First World War around that time. And what it did was it brought in a constitution. Like they were tired of being ruled by a sultan, which would have been like a king, right? Hundreds of years of being ruled by a monarchy. So they brought in the idea and the parliament and established a constitution, and also modernization, right? Bringing the old world into the new. There were still elements though that were thinking of the Ottoman Empire, the old guard, right? They thought of themselves as being the empire of old, and this world war had just started, and why weren't they in it? Because they were the Ottoman Empire, the great Ottoman Empire. And I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but I mean, and simplifying. But the thing is, there was elements within the Ottoman Empire that wanted to join the war, and certainly the Germans wanted them to join the war. So what they did was they took a couple of German ships. I think they were cruisers, I could be wrong, but I think they were cruisers, and they basically dressed these ships up and their crews up over German to look like the Ottomans, and fly the Ottoman flag, sailed them up into the Black Sea there and attacked the Russians. And the Russians, of course, there's this war going on, right? And the Russians, whoa, they started shooting at them, shooting back at them, right? They're like, oh, the Russians are attacking us. So false flag operation all around, right? And next thing you know, the Ottoman Empire was in the war on the side of the Central Powers. Probably not a good idea for them. They probably should have just sat that one out, but like there was those people who wanted them in it, right? Anyway, they did have some initial success though, like in Gallipoli and down in Mesopotamia. But the tide turned in about 1916 with the Arab Revolt. This was a revolt where it started in Mecca that wanted to establish one Arab state. That would have taken out a lot of the Ottoman territory. And so the British were all in favor of that, right? Because they could get these Arabs to fight the Ottomans with them and for them. And so they supported the Arab Revolt, and they were going to support that state if it had been established. Anyway, the war ends, and the Central Powers lose, and Constantinople is occupied by the British and the French and the Italians and the Greeks. And so then there was a war of independence from 1919 to 1923 that established the Turkish Republic. And the last sultan was abolished in 1922, so that was the end of their monarchy. And the Republic of Turkey was established in 1923, with its capital being moved from Constantinople over to Ankara, which I believe is in this province here, in Anatolia, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, that's a brief history and the GHGized version of it. I like to be a little irreverent when I'm talking about these things, kind of like the drunk history show that you see on TV. Anyway, let's talk about the game now. So, you start the 1914 turn off, you're not at war. And earlier, like I talked about, I think it was the French or the British, they didn't want to attack them because that would have brought them into the war. And also they would have had to pay a penalty for doing that, because the Ottoman Empire was a neutral country. And the rules are that if the Allies attack a neutral country, then they pay that penalty. So they had to avoid doing that. But even though you start your turn off as the Ottomans, probably the thing that you want to do is declare war just before the end of your turn, because you have a peacetime income. All the nations do have a peacetime income in the prequel, and it's much lower than their regular income. So the Ottomans' income and what they have on hand right now is only 2 IPPs, whereas their wartime income is 10 IPPs. There is a thing where it can be 11, but that's not in this core game though. So 10 IPPs if we declare war before we collect our income on this turn. Anyway, let's start the turn then. Let's move around to the other side. We've got to do the technology thing. Now, up till now, all of the other nations had a thing where they could stick their roundel on 2 of the technologies at stage 1 or 1 roundel on stage 2. The Ottomans don't have that option. They were not in the war to begin with, so they're not going to get that. They do start with defense in depth, as you see there on stage 3, and down at the bottom there's improved logistics in stage 1. They do have 1 major factory on Constantinople there, and when we originally started playtesting the game, they didn't have a major factory. They only had a medium, but we wanted to make that a major, even though it's probably not accurate. We just kind of fudged it a little bit because we wanted them to participate with technology. And the Ottomans don't make a lot of money in this game. They're hurting for cash, right? And so to spend the extra money just upgrading your factory was a big ask for them, right? And so we started the game off with them with one major factory, and I seriously doubt they'll ever get more than that, right? Anyway, so they do get one, and obviously we're going to go for wartime economy to try to bolster that, and so they'll need a 7 or more, and here we go, an 8. There we go. They needed that. So wartime economy stage 1. There we go. So yeah, you can see that they're a poor man's Central Power, right? They only got one roll of dice, and they don't start out with any extra technology like the other ones do. So we're obviously not doing any combat moves. Let's do a non-combat move here. We've got a boat in port here. That's a torpedo boat destroyer. We're going to move it in port with these other ships over here to try to consolidate their navy. Now we don't want to move too much out of Constantinople because we're going to declare war, and we don't want anybody coming in there and taking out Constantinople, right? So we got to be very conservative. When we look down there though, down in Palestine, there's a bunch of stuff in Egypt, right? So what we will do is we'll move this guy down and then one of these guys down here, which in other words just takes the chip down there. Sleight of hand. There we go. Let's aim the gun over there too. One thing you can notice here is that there is a bunch of militia there. So there's 3 militia in the Middle East. There's a militia down there in what is that? Darfur Sultanate. So they have some militias down there. And let me just take a minute to explain that. The British also have some militia outside of their home country. And like if you read the rules, when you place units outside of your home country, if you're placing them inside the home country and they're these $2 infantry units, then it's militia. If you place them outside of your home country, then it is a colonial troop, because the militia can't move outside of the home country. But this isn't just a game mechanic, it's an actual thing. The reason why there's militia and colonial troops is that militia are kind of regional troops, right? Like they're the kind of, you're arming local citizens, like organizing them so that if they ever get attacked, then, it's kind of like a volunteer fire department, right? So that's why there's militias down there. They will defend those territories, but they can't move. And that's by design, because that's what existed historically down is they had local troops that were not traveling. Now, if you were to put a colonial troop on, and that's what you will do from now on, if you're putting one of those outside of home country, then those units have the ability to move from region to region. So, in other words, territory to territory. But if you're wondering why there's militia there and you're questioning that, then that is the reason, is because historically those units were only local troops, and they had no plans on going anywhere. They never did plan on going anywhere. They were just going to defend their home ground. Anyway, so that's why. As far as diplomacy goes, like we do have 2 IPP, and I thought about maybe we should take that 2 IPP and roll the dice. But as you can see, they've got nothing going here, right? They weren't much on diplomacy, right? There's a couple of things that we could do. Like the one thing that sticks out to me is maybe going after Romania here and taking that down one. But, like that's going to cost us $1 to do that. Here, let's just take a look here. Here's Romania. So you see how much stuff is in Romania. There's a factory there, there's 5 infantry, there's a militia, and there's a torpedo boat destroyer. That is one of those places that automatically align. Now, that will automatically align to the French later on if we don't bring them down and start them up somebody else's track. Like if you could get them so that they were stage one of the Ottomans or the Germans or the Austro-Hungarians, then they will not automatically align anymore. That kind of cancels that out. However, you got to roll a 2 on a D12, and that's just, it's not very likely. And when you consider how weak we are down here in the Ottoman Empire, then you're thinking maybe we should just hang on to that 2 IPP. Like, we could spend that 2 IPP right now and buy ourselves a militia or a colonial troop, but I think what we'll do is we'll just hang on to that 2 IPP so that we have 12 next turn, and then we can maybe buy 4 infantry instead. Germany is not going to be able to lend-lease them anything because there's no lend-lease path currently. Like, they can't get through Serbia, and they can't get through the Strait of Gibraltar. So there's no path for them to get any lend-lease. So let's just hang on to that $2, and I will take 10 IPP and put it on their build plate with the other 2 IPP. So they have 12 IPP next turn. And yeah, that's our whole turn. You can see why I talked a little bit about history, because there wasn't much more to do for the Ottomans. So that's something that you can, like, if you're spending 10-15 minutes taking the Ottoman turn, then you're taking too long, even once they get going in the war, because everything is pretty much right there. There's a couple things down in Africa, but they're not going to last. You find a lot of the random events take place down there, though. So that's kind of cool. It gets them a little bit more involved. And a lot of the random events help them as well. We've already had one random event where they stuck an attacking infantry in, what was that place down there? Albania. So that's the kind of thing that you'll see. You'll see more like that with the Ottomans. Anyway, that's all I got today. Next will be the Russian Empire, and that should be a fairly big turn because the Russians have a lot of stuff on the border of Austria and Germany, and they're looking pretty scary, so you won't want to miss that. Let's say goodbye to this one, and we'll get on to the Russian Empire next. Take care, everyone. General Hand Grenade, out.